I did want to ask you if you have any overarching thoughts about the Cavaliers, and they fall to the Knicks in 5 games. The discourse on them turned pretty quickly, I would say. And Jamie Bickerstaff, I think rightfully so. Mike Savagno on Twitter pointed this out, and he does a lot of good fantasy stuff, but he's great at covering the Cavs. He just got away from what was their most used lineup during the regular season and one of their most effective with Isaac Okoro plus your 4 studs. And I think Bickerstaff deserves criticism for a lot of the rotations he ran. Did he stick with Danny Green at points too long? For the way that they approached Jalen Brunson defensively. But at the same time, I actually think the Okoro hesitancy says more about his offensive viability than anything else. We talked about on this podcast how he was hitting threes in the regular season, and maybe his injury had fucked things up leading into the postseason. It's different in the playoffs. It just is. We saw the Knicks were just leaving him. They didn't give a fuck. It made defending the Cavs offense even easier. And when Evan Mobley's shooting like 1 of 80 outside the restricted area, and Donovan Mitchell doesn't have it going, Darius Garland doesn't necessarily have it going, it makes it tougher. And so I had Jamie Bickerstaff, I think, 2nd or 3rd on my Coach of the Year ballot. I'm not saying he's inoculated against criticism. And as Mike Savagno did point out, there's value in making the decision, quote unquote, too soon than waiting too long. Donovan Mitchell, there is a sense of urgency here. Donovan Mitchell's 2 years left on his deal. You're not going to have a relatively cheap core forever. At the same time, yes, they've played their best trade chips. Everyone's so fucking young. And like Donovan Mitchell's going to be 27 when next season starts. Your two of your 3 best players, Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, have not celebrated their 24th birthdays yet and won't before next season. Jared Allen is like 25, just turned 25 himself. The move, if they really wanted to make a trade, is like, can we trade Jared Allen for a wing? But as we saw, the Cavs have rebounding issues now. Mm-hmm. They're going to get worse if you all of a sudden go to pivot to 1 big minutes with Mobley. You have to figure out who's going to be the 4 next to him, blah, 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 blah. And the Jared Allen, OG Anunoby trade just no longer makes sense. I'm sorry to tell you. I didn't propose this on the pod. This is Jared Allen as like a package for Paul George. Is that enough? But I don't think the Clippers want to change up their center rotation that much. And that does nothing for you if you don't think Kawhi is going to be available.
Yeah, I think if I'm the Clippers, I don't want Allen and Zubac. So I guess I'm sending back Zubac just because I don't want to spend a bunch of resources on center.
To offer you. And so my whole thing with the Cavs, and I think it does it to say that they weren't a letdown does a disservice to how good they were this season. And but at the same time, like, it's why I want to spotlight Mobley shooting 20% outside the restricted area. The Knicks rebounded 38.7% of their own misses. And we'll get to the Knicks in a second for anyone who's like thumbnail stalking right now. But like, this trade for Mitchell wasn't made with just this season in mind. This team not only has time, but it also takes time to kind of balance out and figure out your roster in the aftermath of these seismic shakeups. And I would argue that the information Cleveland gleaned from this series with its current personnel, not JB Bickerstaff, becomes super valuable heading into an offseason where, again, they'll have the non-taxpayers level exception and plenty of playing time at the 3. And I don't know what Isaac Okoro plus minimal stuff can get you at this point. Like, you are not completely, I would argue the Bucks are more, admit that's not really a hot take. They just don't have as many cards to play as Cleveland does. And so I'm not as down on Cleveland's future as maybe I should be after that playoff series, just because I don't think this year was found money. I think they were better than expected. And like, it takes a little time. Like, it was one season, you played all your best trade assets on this one guy. And now you have, just because Donovan Mitchell struggled in the series against a Knicks team defense that was incredibly, like, just incredible is the word. And 2, just like, now you know, hey, oh wow, our spacing is like a big deal. Like playing with the 2 bigs, and when Mobley's going to be run hot and cold and doesn't really have much of a perimeter game, and we're not going to rely on his floor game as much. And by the way, the other pathway forward is like Evan Mobley just continues to figure it out on offense, like we saw for much of the regular season. And so I'm just curious as to where you landed on just the circumstances under which they exited the playoffs, because it was 5 games. You had Cavs in 6, I had Cavs in 7. So they were shockingly bad by our standards.
Yeah, no, I think the idea that, I think there's a lot of merit to the idea that the Cavs got, you win. It's a kind of an ultimate example of like, you win or you learn, that like that old trope, so the Cavs learned a lot. I think the counter to that is they learned a few things, or they at least got confirmation of a few things that they probably should have known earlier. Like we spent the whole year talking about the fifth starter situation, and they just don't have a small forward that that ticks enough boxes. And that was maybe not even the main factor, but it was up there in the reasons that they lost. I think one of the most, Jason Lloyd wrote one of my favorite kind of post-mortems that I've read in a while about the Cavs. I don't know if you saw this, but it was one of those where very clearly it was written from like an emotional place, because it seemed to me that he was not, I don't know what the emotion was, but it wasn't just, it had a little extra punch to it, because it the disappointment came through, and like the frustration came through, and the sincere reaction of this team just lost and I don't feel good about it came through, which doesn't detract from the points he made at all, because like argumentatively and on the merits, it was very good. But the thing I took away from that was a point he made about like how much better off are the Cavs as a playoff team with Donovan Mitchell versus like over the next however many years versus Lauri Markkanen and all those picks. Like, and I think it's hard to argue that after the season Mitchell had. They're probably, we saw this version of the Cavs pretty much with Markkanen on it, and they just weren't as good of a team 2 years ago now. But that was compelling to me, because we're talking about like, how do they address all these weaknesses? Not to mention, how do we not get crushed on the boards? Maybe put a third 7-footer out there. I don't know, that might have changed the series.
Though, that says more to me about your front court than it does about your guard. Like, it's nice when you have guards rebounding and wings rebounding, but I think
it was interesting. It made me think for a second. Especially if you believe that Donovan Mitchell is going to end up in New York at his first opportunity, which I don't know if I believe.
I don't know if I believe it. He seemed genuinely ecstatic to get traded to Cleveland, and they were really good. And if you regret this trade now after watching this series, I would say that's a bigger indictment on how you feel about the Mobley Allen front court. They were just gobbled up by Mitchell Robinson.
Right. Okay. I want to get to that. So that because I wanted to finish talking about the series before we look at more Knicks or wherever you want to take it. But I think this is one of the series. So take the Bucks Heat, for example. But many of the other series, we have this tendency to focus, I think, and you tell me if you disagree on.
I disagree.
Team. I was just going to say you're really a great podcaster and a good human being. But if you don't agree with that, that's fine. It always seems to me like we fixate, like, look how much we talked about the Bucks. We fixate on like Team X lost the series versus Team Y won it. And I think it's just easier to point out like what went wrong than it is to praise what went right. Or maybe it's more interesting. I'm not sure. But in this series particularly, it seems like Team X, the reasons Team X lost are so closely related to the reasons Team Y won. And it's just the Cavs could not handle the offensive boards. They got destroyed inside. The Knicks were awesome at that. Like Mitchell Robinson put on maybe one of the best offensive rebounding performances I can remember seeing. He dominated inside. The Cavs are limited offensively. They just could not win in advantage situations when the Knicks forced the ball out of their guards' hands, and particularly Evan Mobley had to make a decision in space with a third defender crashing in off the corner shooter most of the time, because the Knicks didn't care if it was Isaac Okoro or whoever. In your view, was this did the Cavs lose this series? Did the Knicks win this series? Are those two different things? And just in general, like, what are your thoughts on like that way of thinking about a series? How we tend to focus on, Giannis was 10 and 23 from the line versus like Jimmy Butler was unstoppable and the Heat had great strategy. Like, you know what I mean? So take the Knicks Cavs thing first and then broaden it out if you want.
The Knicks won this series to me. I have never seen Tom Thibodeau adjust like this on the fly since I started watching basketball and knew that Tom Thibodeau existed.
Notoriously inflexible.
And you talk about takes that age so poorly. I still stand by what I wrote in the moment. But me calling for Tom Thibodeau to get fired, just absolutely wild. So I do think it's more of the Knicks winning this series because they exposed flaws that we kind of knew about with Cleveland, but we understand now they're going to be, because look, part of it, let's focus. The rebounding has always been weird, by the way. That's like, even during the 1 big minutes, that's something that made the Kevin Love decision curious. I think they did him a solid because he wanted to go somewhere where apparently he's going to start games. But that's something that he could have helped with, but it was also still, they weren't using him a ton and it was still an issue then there. But like, I'm using Okoro as an example. There was an expectation, and maybe we're not talking about this if Dean Wade is super healthy, but it is. I love Dean Wade, but he's Dean Wade. Like he's Dean
Right.
Wade.
He
And
can't be the make or break for you.
right. And so the thought was, look, Isaac Okoro's defense, and he's hitting these threes, and we know what he can do as a cutter. Like that's gonna hold up. Why wouldn't that hold up in the look at this sample size? The playoffs are different. The spacing is different. The defenses are different. And look, the I said this about Herb Jones on the mailbag pod. Your ability as if you trust him as a driver, as a cutter, that means roughly jack shit when you don't have the spacing to capitalize on it,
Yeah.
which the Cavs just right now do not. And it makes it easier for teams to go after Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland, especially if you have non-threats elsewhere, or if there's not other guys who can make decisions and create with the ball in their hand. Like with the way that they're set up now, is if Evan Mobley's not going to be your third advantage creator, you need a third advantage creator.
Right.
And so that's why I'm more concerned about, well, how do they, like you could get, like they could put Luke Kennard in that 3 spot if they were able to get him. That's not going to fix all of their issues either. And so I think you really need to take a look at, it's Mobley just hits. And maybe he does, might also be unrealistic to expect him to anchor these elite rebounding units, given how much time he spends defensively away from the basket, which then that's the trickle down effect of the 2 guards you have, what's happening at the 3 spot. But I still think that, and I think this would probably be to finally get to the Knicks, like Heat series. This series, do you disagree, was more, I don't know how you feel. It was more about the Knicks to me than it was the Cavs.
I don't know how I feel. That's why I wanted to talk about it. I think everything is so connected. I think ultimately you have to give the Knicks credit for, at the very least, capitalizing on the opposing team's weaknesses better than the reverse. Because, we both picked the Cavs. So clearly we thought the Knicks had some weaknesses, and we thought one of the main ones was Julius Randle, and that just turned out to not matter almost at all. So I guess I think I probably do have to lean that the Knicks did win it, as opposed to the Cavs losing it.